At 2 a.m., my phone lit up with a single message from my mom. "If anything happens to me, promise you'll fight back." My hands shook as I read it, knowing she was trapped in a nightmare that could tear our family apart. I used to believe that once my mom and I had survived the hardest years, things would finally get easier. After all, she had sacrificed everything to give me a chance at a better life. Her name is Lucia Ramirez, and she came to the U.S. from Honduras with nothing but a passport, a suitcase full of secondhand clothes, and a determination stronger than steel. Growing up, she always told me, "We don't stop. Even when it hurts, we keep going." And she meant it. By the time I was in college, she was working at a packaging factory that supplied hospitals with gloves, gowns, and masks. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough for us to rent a small 2-bedroom apartment. Between her wages and the part-time job I held at a grocery store, we managed. No luxuries, but also no crushing debt. I thought we had finally achieved a fragile stability. But it was false stability. For months, I ignored the signs. Mom's swollen hands when she came home, the way she winced while unlacing her boots, the energy drinks piling up in the trash. I'd find her asleep on the couch, still wearing her factory uniform, hair matted with sweat, lips murmuring half-formed sentences in Spanish. When I asked if she was okay, she always brushed it off. "Estoy bien, hija. Just tired." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think everything was normal, that our lives had finally escaped the chaos of the past. I didn't see the fear hiding in her eyes, or maybe I just didn't want to. The truth hit me one Tuesday night when I came home from class and found her collapsed on the living room floor. Her work ID badge was still hanging from her neck, and her phone buzzed on the coffee table with a contact name flashing, "Mr. Carter, supervisor." I picked it up and froze. The text messages were relentless. "Back in 1 hour. Don't make me call immigration. Don't test me, Lucia. I have your papers. Be at the line by 10 p.m. or I'll make sure ICE knows about you." My mom has been a permanent resident for 16 years. Her green card is valid, and she's done nothing wrong. Yet here was this man, her boss, holding her life hostage with lies and threats. When I shook her awake, she panicked, mumbling in broken English, Sorry, I go back now." That was the moment I realized everything I thought was stable in our lives was a carefully constructed illusion. We weren't safe. We weren't secure. And someone had just declared war on the only person who ever fought for me. And I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay silent. The first Real warning bell didn't come from my mother's collapse on the living room floor, though that moment shook me. It came a week later, when I insisted on driving her to work myself. She argued, of course. "Mija, you don't need to go. You have school, you have homework." But I refused. Something inside me told me that if I let her walk into that building alone again, I'd regret it. The factory looked ordinary from the outside. Beige walls, a warehouse door, the hum of trucks loading pallets. But the moment we stepped inside, I felt something sour in the air. Rows of immigrant workers stood shoulder to shoulder at assembly lines, their heads down, the rhythm of machines drowning out any conversation. Supervisors with clipboards stalked the aisles like prison guards. And then I saw him. Mr. Carter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe in his late 50s, with gray hair slicked back too neatly and a smirk plastered on his face. The kind of man who thought authority made him untouchable. His eyes scanned the floor until they landed on my mom, and his smirk widened. "Well, Lucia," he said, his voice loud enough for nearby workers to hear. "I was wondering if you'd have the sense to show up tonight." My stomach twisted. I stepped forward before my mom could answer. "She's here. She's not late. And you need to stop sending her those texts." The smile slipped off his face for a fraction of a second, then returned sharper, colder. "And who might you be?" "Her daughter," I said firmly. "And if you keep harassing her, I'll go straight to HR. Or higher." The laughter that erupted from him made my blood boil. "HR?" he scoffed. "You think HR cares about people like her? Sweetheart, you have no idea how the world works." Mom gripped my wrist, whispering, "Please, let's go." Her voice was trembling. But Carter leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You should teach your mother some discipline. She owes me. And if you want her to keep her job and her papers, you'd better stay out of this." I wanted to scream. Instead, I swallowed the rage burning in my chest and led my mom out of the factory. She kept her eyes on the floor, silent until we reached the car. As soon as the doors shut, I turned to her. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because, Hija, I can't lose this job. If I lose it, we lose everything. That was the first warning bell. Realizing Carter's threats weren't just ****, they were control. He had her convinced that she couldn't survive without him, even though it was his abuse that was breaking her. But things didn't stop there. The next day, when I came home from class, there was an envelope wedged under our apartment door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence typed in bold: "Stay out of this or you'll regret it." No signature. No details. Just enough to make my skin crawl. Mom tried to brush it off as a prank, but I knew better. This was Carter's way of letting me know he was watching. That he wasn't afraid to cross lines. And it worked. For a while. I started checking over my shoulder walking home, double-locking the door, sleeping with the TV on just to drown out the sound of my own fear. But the more afraid I felt, the more determined I became. That was the warning bell I couldn't ignore. If Carter was willing to threaten me, not just my mom, then things were already far worse than I imagined. And if I didn't act, he wouldn't stop. The weeks that followed felt like living inside a tightening vice. Every day, Carter found new ways to remind us that he held the upper hand, and every day, my mother sank deeper into silence. It started at work. I picked her up one evening and noticed bruises along her wrist. When I asked, she muttered, "Just a machine accident." But I'd seen her careful hands at work my whole life. She wasn't clumsy. Later, through whispers from one of her coworkers, I learned Carter had grabbed her arm in front of everyone when she slowed down to rub her aching shoulder. No one dared step in. Then the schedules began to change. Mom was suddenly assigned night shifts back-to-back, often without proper breaks. Her paychecks were docked for errors she swore she didn't make. The exhaustion etched into her face scared me more than any threat Carter could text. At home, she barely spoke. She'd sit at the table, her dinner untouched, staring at her phone as if waiting for the next demand. Sometimes she jumped at noises outside, convinced someone was watching. And maybe she was right. One night, as I was walking back from the grocery store, a car slowed behind me. Its headlights crawled across the sidewalk, matching my steps. My heart pounded as I quickened my pace. Then suddenly, the engine revved and the car sped off. I caught a glimpse of the driver, just a shadow, but my gut told me it was connected. I didn't tell Mom. She had enough to worry about. But I started sleeping with a baseball bat by my bed. The isolation crept in too. My best friend, Haley, stopped texting me as much after I canceled on her 3 weekends in a row. "You're always busy," she complained, not knowing that I was busy sitting in the dark, watching the window, making sure Carter didn't follow through on his threats. Even my professors began to notice my slipping grades. One pulled me aside after class. "Is everything all right at home?" I wanted to scream no, nothing is all right. My mom is being terrorized by her boss and I don't know how to save her. But instead, I nodded and said, "Just a lot going on." The worst moment came when I found my mother at 2 a.m., crouched in the bathroom with a shower running to mask her sobs. "He said if I tell anyone, they'll take me away," she whispered when I begged her to open the door. "If they deport me, what happens to you?" Hearing her fear cut me deeper than any threat Carter had aimed at me. He had managed to isolate her completely, making her believe that even the law couldn't protect her. And in some ways, he was right. Stories of immigrants, even legal ones, being targeted unjustly weren't rare. He exploited that fear like a wee ****P****N. By the end of the month, I felt like we were both prisoners. She was trapped by his threats, and I was trapped by the helplessness of watching her break. But isolation breeds clarity. The more Carter tightened his grip, the more I realized that waiting quietly would only make things worse. If he could reduce my strong, unshakable mother to this fragile shell, what would he do next? I wasn't just scared anymore. I was angry. And anger can be dangerous, especially when it gives you the courage to fight back. I didn't know it yet, but the walls closing in on us were about to crack. Because the truth has a way of leaking out, even when someone like Carter tries to bury it. And when it finally did, everything shifted. The breaking point came not with another threat, but with an unexpected ally. It was a Friday evening when I stopped by the factory to wait for Mom. I leaned against the fence near the employee lot, scrolling my phone, when a woman in her 30s approached me. Her hair was pulled back under a cap, and her eyes darted nervously before settling on mine. "You're Lucia's daughter, right?" she asked softly. I straightened, cautious. "Yes. Why?" She hesitated, then slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. She helped me once when I almost fainted on the line. "I don't have much, but I can't keep quiet anymore. He's dangerous." Before I could ask anything, she hurried off, disappearing into the stream of workers leaving the building. Hands trembling, I unfolded the paper. It was a printed email thread. The subject line read, "Overtime compensation adjustments." But the content made my blood run cold. It wasn't about overtime at all. It was between Carter and another manager, discussing how they were skimming wages from immigrant workers, funneling the money into a side business. One line stuck out, "Lucia is starting to complain. If she makes noise, I'll remind her how easy it would be for ICE to pay her a visit." Proof. Hard, undeniable proof. When Mom got into the car, her face drawn with exhaustion, I handed her the paper. She froze, her lips trembling as she read. "I knew he was stealing from us," she whispered, "but I didn't know it was this bad." That night, for the first time in weeks, Mom didn't resist when I said we needed to act. We sat at the kitchen table, the paper between us, as I laid out the options. "We could go to the police," I said. "But if they don't believe us, he'll retaliate." Her eyes flickered with fear. "Mija, they never believe people like us." "Then we need more," I insisted. "We need enough that they can't ignore it." That was the beginning of our plan. For the next week, we quietly gathered everything we could. Mom smuggled out copies of schedules showing wage theft. I searched public records for Carter's business dealings. Together, we built a case brick by brick, every document another piece of the puzzle. But the biggest revelation came from somewhere I hadn't expected. Remember the mysterious co-worker who'd given me that first email? Her name was Rosa. She reached out again, this time with a USB drive. "You didn't get this from me," she whispered, pressing it into my palm. At home, I plugged it into my laptop and nearly fell off my chair. The drive contained surveillance footage from the factory floor, secretly recorded by Rosa. In one clip, Carter could be seen berating my mom, grabbing her wrist and hissing words we couldn't hear. In another, he bragged to another supervisor about breaking the stubborn ones by threatening deportation. It wasn't just evidence of wage theft, it was evidence of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of power. When Mom saw it, she broke down, sobbing into her hands. "He can't hide anymore," she said through her tears. For the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. The revelation was bigger than Carter's threats. It was bigger than one man abusing his authority. It was about a system that allowed people like him to prey on the vulnerable. And suddenly I realized, if we exposed him, we wouldn't just be saving ourselves. We might be saving dozens of other families too. That thought gave me strength. But revelations have consequences. And Carter, sensing that his grip was slipping, wasn't about to let go without a fight. Once we had the emails, the pay stubs, and Rosa's footage, it was no longer a question of if we should fight back, but how. Carter wasn't the kind of man who would fold easily. If we went at him recklessly, we risked everything. Mom's job, her safety, even her residency status. We needed a plan. That weekend, I called my friend Haley, the one I'd been pushing away for weeks. When she arrived at our apartment and I finally poured everything out, Carter's threats, the stolen wages, the footage, her jaw dropped. "Ellie," she whispered, gripping my hand, "this isn't just harassment. This is criminal. You need a lawyer." The word lawyer sent a wave of fear through Mom, who shook her head violently. "No, no. Too dangerous. If Carter finds out." But Haley leaned forward. "That's the point. You don't go to him. You go over him. Way over." Through Haley's connections at her university, we found Jenna Morales, a young legal aid attorney who specialized in labor rights. When we met her at her tiny office downtown, cluttered with stacks of files, she listened without interrupting. When we finished, she pushed her glasses up and said, "This is bigger than you think. What Carter is doing isn't just intimidation. It's wage fraud, blackmail, and harassment. If we play this right, he won't just lose his job, he could face prison." Mom's eyes widened. "But the police?" Jenna shook her head. "We don't go to local police. We go to the Department of Labor, and we take this evidence to the media. Carter thrives on silence. We break that silence." It was terrifying, but it was also the first plan that made sense. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked in secret. Rosa smuggled out more files. I digitized every document, backing them up on encrypted drives Jenna provided. We created a timeline of Carter's abuses, tying every missing paycheck and every text threat into a single damning narrative. Meanwhile, Jenna reached out to a journalist she trusted, someone known for exposing labor exploitation cases. The goal wasn't just legal action, it was public exposure. If Carter was dragged into the light, he couldn't quietly retaliate without everyone noticing. But Carter wasn't stupid. He sensed resistance, and his counterattacks grew bolder. One night, as Mom and I returned home, we found our front door ajar. My heart raced as I pushed it open to find the living room torn apart, couch cushions slashed, papers scattered, drawers yanked open. Nothing valuable was missing. It wasn't a robbery. It was a warning. On the wall, in thick black marker, were the words, "Stop or else." Mom clutched my arm, shaking. "Mija, he knows." I called Jenna immediately. She urged us to stay calm but admitted this meant we were running out of time. "We need to move fast. He's escalating." So we did. The plan was set for Carter's quarterly safety meeting, where he gathered staff in the cafeteria to boast about production numbers. Rosa tipped us off that he loved recording those meetings for corporate PR. On the day of the meeting, while Carter was droning on at the podium about integrity and teamwork, Rosa discreetly swapped the presentation laptop with Jenna's drive. And suddenly, instead of Carter's graphs, the screen lit up with time-stamped emails, payroll records, and finally, the video clips of him grabbing Mom's wrist, threatening deportation. Gasps filled the room. Workers stared, some covering their mouths, others nodding furiously as they recognized their own stories in the evidence. Carter froze, his face draining of color. "Turn that off," he bellowed, but no one moved. His control was shattered in real time. Within hours, the journalist published the full story online. By evening, it was trending. Factory supervisor accused of exploiting immigrant workers. But the most satisfying moment came the next morning, when federal agents walked Carter out of the building in handcuffs. For the first time in months, Mom smiled without fear. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over yet. People like Carter didn't just vanish quietly. And though the counterstrike had landed, the final showdown was still to come. The day Carter was arrested should have been the end of everything. The footage was out, the story was viral, and the Department of Labor had already launched an official investigation into the factory. For a few days, it almost felt like we could breathe again. Mom cooked without flinching at every noise outside, and I slept through the night for the first time in months. But Carter wasn't the type of man to accept defeat. Just a week after his arrest, Jenna called us into her office, her face grave. "They granted him bail," she said. "He's out, and he's already hiring private investigators. He's trying to dig up dirt to discredit you." My stomach dropped. "But we have the evidence." "Yes," Jenna interrupted, "but people like him don't play fair. If he can smear your reputation or your mother's, he'll try to make this case look like revenge instead of justice." And he did try. Anonymous letters began arriving at our apartment, claiming my mom had faked her paperwork, that she wasn't legally in the country. Another letter accused me of stealing tuition money from my college to fund some anti-factory crusade. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. The goal was to plant doubt. Then, one night as I was walking home from my shift at the grocery store, I felt that same creeping sensation I'd felt weeks earlier. Footsteps behind me, matching my pace. When I turned, two men stood under a street lamp, watching silently. They didn't follow, but the message was clear. The pressure was unbearable. Mom begged me to drop the case, terrified that something worse would happen. But the thought of letting Carter win after everything he'd done lit a fire inside me. "If we stop now, he'll do this to someone else," I told her. "We can't let him crawl back into the shadows." Jenna agreed. She arranged for us to testify at Carter's bail hearing, where we'd lay out every piece of evidence publicly, under oath. If the judge believed us, his bail would be revoked, and he'd be behind bars until trial. The morning of the hearing, I could barely steady my hands as I stood in the courthouse hallway. Mom sat beside me, whispering prayers under her breath. When they finally called us in, Carter was already seated at the defense table, smirking as if he still owned the room. As Jenna questioned us, I told the judge about the texts, the envelope shoved under our door, the night our home was trashed. Mom spoke, her voice trembling but clear, about the bruises, the threats, the years of silence. Then Rosa testified, confirming that what we'd shown was only a fraction of what workers endured under Carter's control. Carter's lawyer tried to paint us as liars, desperate for attention. But when Jenna played the surveillance footage on the courtroom screen, Carter's hand clamped around my mother's wrist, his voice low and menacing. The room went dead silent. Finally, the judge leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Mr. Carter, this court is revoking your bail. You will be remanded until trial." The sound of the gavel was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Carter erupted, shouting as officers restrained him. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." But this time, his threats didn't carry the same weight. He wasn't a shadow lurking outside our window anymore. He was a man in chains, his power stripped away in front of everyone. As they dragged him from the courtroom, Mom clutched my hand, tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered. "Mija, we finally did it." For the first time, I believed her. The final showdown wasn't about fists or violence. It was about standing up in the open, refusing to be silenced, and forcing a predator into the light. And though the trial was still ahead, I knew in that moment that we had already won. When the gavel came down and Carter was taken away, it felt like the first sunrise after a storm that had lasted far too long. But the aftermath wasn't simple. Healing never is. For weeks after the bail hearing, Mom and I still jumped at unexpected noises. We still double-locked the door, still scanned the street before leaving the apartment. Trauma doesn't disappear overnight. Yet little by little, life began to feel livable again. The first change was Mom. Without Carter looming over her, her spirit began to return. She laughed more, sometimes at the silliest things, like when she burned tortillas and pretended they were extra crispy chips. She began cooking her favorite recipes again, humming as she worked in the kitchen. Then came the factory. After the story went viral, the company faced federal scrutiny. Corporate executives couldn't ignore the scandal any longer. They fired Carter permanently and launched a full audit of their labor practices. Several other supervisors were implicated, and dozens of workers came forward to share similar stories. The Department of Labor forced the company to pay back stolen wages, and reforms were implemented. For the first time, those workers felt safe enough to stand tall. Rosa, the brave woman who had risked everything to help us, became a leader among them. She started a workers' coalition, and Mom joined, determined to protect others from enduring what she had survived. As for me, something inside had shifted forever. I wasn't just a scared daughter anymore. I had found my voice, and once I had it, I couldn't put it back in the shadows. With Jenna's encouragement, I changed my major to political science, focusing on labor law. I started volunteering at her office, helping translate documents for immigrant clients who didn't speak English fluently. I realized that what happened to us wasn't unique. Families everywhere were silenced by fear and ****. If I could help even one more family fight back, then our suffering wouldn't have been in vain. One evening, months after Carter's arrest, Mom and I sat on the porch of our apartment, sipping tea as the sun set. The air felt different. Lighter. "You know," she said softly, "when your father left us, I thought we would never survive. Then Carter came, and I thought we would never be free. But look at us now." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. "We made it, Mom. You made it." She shook her head gently. "No, Mija. We made it. Together." The trial eventually came, and Carter was sentenced to several years in federal prison. The sight of him in an orange jumpsuit, shackled and powerless, was closure we hadn't known we needed. His threats no longer had teeth. His shadow no longer stretched into our lives. But the real victory wasn't his downfall. It was what rose from the ashes: my mother's strength, my own determination, and the community of workers who refused to be silent anymore. Today, when I walk past the factory, I don't feel fear. I feel pride. Pride that we stood up. Pride that we changed something, even if it was just a small corner of a broken system. Carter once told me I'd regret getting involved. He was wrong. The only regret I have is not fighting back sooner. Because in the end, he threatened my mother, but what he never understood was that loving her meant I would never ever stop fighting. And that love made us stronger than he ever imagined.